2.5, you will be able to name the 7 basic functions. That's what your quiz is on tomorrow. So if you'll turn to page 283, we're going to talk about the 7 basic functions. There will be pictures that look just like this. So it's not intended to be difficult. You probably know all of them, but maybe 2. So I'm going to make sure that you understand those. And then you're going to describe transformations. So turn to page 283 in your book. And you will see the 7 functions that I'm talking about. Okay, let's talk about the 7 basic functions. Now, I'm going to give you these exact graphs. The first one you ought to know. It's just a line going through a point. The name of it in general is y equals c, because it's a constant. Y equals 2, y equals -3, y equals 10. So if you have a horizontal line, the basic equation, I don't want y equals -2, I don't want y equals 3. I don't care about where it passes through. I want to know that the basic equation of this line is y equals c. Okay, so when you see one like this tomorrow, that's what you're going to write. Now the next one you ought to know, it's a what? It's a line. This one, this is an equation of a line. What's the general equation of a line? Y equals mx plus b. The slope on this is 1. What's the y-intercept? 0. So it's y equals x. Okay, y equals x. That's this equation, the equation of any diagonal line. Now this, that's what I'm telling you. Now the next one, what is the shape of the next one? That's your clue. It is a V. That is absolute value. V for value. So far these ought to be nothing new. Okay, I got tape on the floor. I got to stay between the tape.
Got to keep it between the navigation and movement.
All right. The next one is a quadratic. What's the general equation for this one?
Y equals mx plus b.
No, that's a line. This is not a line. Y equals x squared.
That was my first guess. Second.
Y'all know you're being recorded
Where's it going to go?
on YouTube.
They can hear us in the background.
All right, you should know this one. I just got through. Now, the next one you may not know, but you will as soon as I give you a hint. Look at this. It almost looks like a what? Think math. square root. So this one is new, but if you can see the radical there, it's the square root of x. Now the last three will be the ones that you'll need to really focus on remembering, but that's a square root. Now the next one looks almost like the y equals x, but it has a little curvature to it. Y equals x cubed. So you remember this by it starts at the bottom and goes to the top just like y equals x. It's another odd function, so it can't be x squared. X squared looks like a u, so it's got to be x cubed. So we have x, x squared, and x cubed.
I bet it's x. The cube root and x.
It is. Now, how do we know it's a cube root? Well, look. This one looks just like the square root, except it has another piece to it. So it still has this part to it, which has a radical. Yes.
Yes.
But it has this other part, which means it's the cube root. It's actually this one, inversed. And that 3 better be small and up here. I do not want that. I will not accept that.
Two separate ones.
Yeah, a 3 square root of x is something that looks like this. It's stretched.
So our quiz would just be like examples of it. Like, will it be more than one? Just
I'm going to give you those 7 pictures. You tell me which one's which.
You can do that.
Three in this example is the radical. Is that what it's called? The thing that's like. in the
That's a
number.
radical. So you see the radical here, which is the same thing as this one. This one only goes in this direction. It's a square root. This one is the radical, but it has another piece over here. It's a cube root. In other words, if you take this cube root right here and you do the inverse of it, that's what you get. So that's your quiz tomorrow. Got me?
yes, ma'am.
Okay. Now, to start what's going to be on your quiz on Wednesday, we're going to learn about transformations. Now, I just need you to trust me and follow along. Write that down just like you see it. Don't worry about the big F in the middle. Write it down just like you see it. I will explain everything.
Not like letters that look the exact same if you flip it upside down.
All right, so we've got something here that looks like a bookshelf. Okay, if you're looking at my bookshelf over here, the pieces on the end are my vertical pieces. So the A and the D are my vertical pieces. The B and C in the middle deal with the horizontal. So we're going to talk about our vertical pieces first. They act the way they're supposed to.
Are we going to be plugging in numbers to this? Or?
Just let me finish, okay? I promise. It won't be, let's take down the notes. So A deals with a vertical stretch. If A, absolute value of A is greater than 1, A is a vertical shrink. If the absolute value of A is less than 1, and if A is negative, there is a reflection about the x-axis. A is found in front and multiplying.
Alright, what is that circle?
At symbol.
I tell you, but we don't have much more notes.
I'll tell you, you do. This is what this will look like. Those are examples of your A. There may even be a negative. So do you notice A is in front of the X in no brackets, no parentheses, no grouping symbols. Now, what I'm having you to learn, those 7 graphs for, is they're part of basic parent functions. There's more parent functions than these. But these are 7 basic parent functions. Now, what does it mean that something is a parent function? Well, it's kind of like your parents, okay? You have parents, whether you want to acknowledge them or not. You may be adopted, so you may not be from your adoptive parents, but you have biological parents in which you have characteristics. Some things are the same. Some things are completely different. You may have a cleft chin, you may have dimples, you may have brown hair. You may have some characteristics that are the same, but some that are different. As a matter of fact, I used to have a crooked tooth before I had a bike wreck. Neither one of my parents had that crooked tooth, but I looked back and my daddy's mother that I never knew, she passed away when he was 9, she had the same crooked tooth that I did. So we've got things that sometimes they don't show up in our parents. These are parent functions. X, absolute value of x, square root of x, x squared, x cubed. Those are parent functions. Anything else that you see that's different is a transformation. Now, we're going to talk about the vertical stretch and vertical shrink. You have to tell me vertical, okay? Is anybody about 5'7" in here? Okay, come up here. Okay, so, Kira and I, we got a lot of differences, right? Couple. We got brown eyes, yeah. Okay, we're about the same height, okay? So, there is no stretch or shrink here. We are about the same height. Come up here, Nathan.
Oh, I'm taller than him. Come on, really? This is discrimination at its finest.
So, is he greater in height than I am?
Yes.
What would you have to do to me to make me his height?
But you want to
Stretch me.
stretch you.
Okay, let's be. Okay, I'm trying to do an example here. I don't need road comments. Okay, Paige, my dear. Okay. Now, obviously, she is smaller in height than I am. So, what would you have to do in order to make me her height? You'd have to shrink me. So, if there is no change in height, if the original function and the new function have the same height in front, there's no transformation. There's no noticeable difference. if the number in front is greater than 1, and 1 is considered our basic plumb line, okay, that's our foundation is 1. If it's greater than 1, you're going to have to vertically stretch the graph to get there. If it's less than 1, less than my height, you're going to have to shrink me. Okay? Thank you. Y'all have a seat.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
Alright. So, when we're taking the notes, it says that the absolute value of A,
Because there's going to be times that there's a negative in front.
but so if it's a negative,
If it's a negative 2, the absolute value of negative 2 is
it's greater than 1.
2, which is greater than 1, which is a vertical stretch
Correct.
by
So why would
2.
you stretch it if it's negative?
No, the negative only tells you it reflects about the axis. The vertical stretch is only the absolute value of that number.
Okay, and if it's positive, it's over the Y, and if it's negative, it's
No,
over
if
the X.
it's positive, there is no reflection. Remember, I'm standing straight up. Okay? So if it's positive, it's doing what I'm doing. If I could stand on my hands, I would reflect, that would be a negative. Okay, the reflection is flipped over. Its feet stays on the axis, but it's flipped over. And it only shows up if it's negative. You can make negative 2. That's the reason I put this here. The negative tells me it reflects about the x-axis. Absolute value of negative 2 is 2, which is greater than 1, which tells me a vertical shrink. The negative 2 has 2 transformations, the reflection and the stretch. Just wait till I do some examples. Okay? So, what would this one be?
It's only what
What
Positive.
But what does this tell me?
There's no string.
My normal function is y equals x. 1 and 1. So 3 is 3 greater than 1 or less than 1? So it's a vertical stretch by 3. Okay? The 1/2. 1 is my baseline.
So you have to
Is
shrink.
1/2 greater or less?
Less than.
Less than.
So you shrink it.
It's a vertical shrink by 1/2. What is this one?
Vertical stretch by 2.
Vertical stretch by 2. Now, what about the number? It's a 1. Is that any change?
So you just put.
Wait, so it's a negative 1, right?
It's a negative 1, but
So
the
you just
negative
leave it
tells me what?
So on that, you would just do the reflection.
That's correct.
Okay. I think I might be starting to understand.
So if it's a 1, there's no change in height.
Yeah.
So you just put no transformation.
You just leave it alone. You don't even acknowledge it. Yes, sir.
So are we just doing absolute values for this part?
Only when you're doing vertical stretch and vertical shrink. If it's negative, you don't ignore the negative. You have to tell me that it reflects across the x. But then
Yeah,
when
I-
you're talking
I
about
understand that. I was just asking if this entire section was going to be absolute value.
no,
No,
Alright, I got one more question that's probably not going to be very smart. But, alright, that thing, that formula, whatever it was that we wrote down at the beginning, what does that have to do with?
because it's telling you the position. Where is the A showing up in my formula?
Very beginning.
At the very beginning in front of the F, right?
Yeah, what is that F?
That just stands for any function. Any function. So my A is showing up in front of any function. In front of the x, in front of the absolute value of x, in front of the square root of x. The A shows up and is multiplying in front of any function. Right here.
I got that much.
Just bear with me.
I'm just
Okay. I'm going to talk about the other vertical piece, and if you remember I said let's think about a bookshelf. So the other vertical piece is on the very end, which is my D. Now my D tells me shift up or down. It acts exactly like it should. So if it's positive, it's a shift up. If it's negative, it's a shift down. And notice another reason, Blake, why I put this up here is because the D is not in grouping brackets. It's not in grouping symbols. So you're using this as kind of a road map.
So the two numbers that are going to be outside the bracket are going to be
A and D.
your
and
vertical.
vertical.
Inside the bracket's going to be your horizontal.
That's correct. Now, let me show you what this might look like. So y equals x minus 5. Is that in any type of grouping symbols? No.
So your A is going to be 1.
So there's no change on my stretch or shrink, right?
Yeah.
It's
You got
just a shift down 5. Okay? So y equals 3x squared plus 7. There's no grouping symbols here.
So you're going to vertically stretch it by 3.
Yes.
And then go up 7.
That's correct. That is correct.
Can that be the hardest problem we put on the test?
B is going to be the hardest one for you. Now, do you notice that B and C are inside some types of grouping? Okay, B will show up in front of the X or whatever. It will look something like this. So hold on. Let me tell you what B. So B we know deals with horizontal, right? Now your inside brackets are your rebellious children. Okay? You may be the vertical child where you do everything you're expected to do. Or you may be the horizontal child who does everything opposite of what you're told to do. B and C are those. So B tells you horizontal stretch and horizontal shrink. Now, let's look back at A. A was a stretch. Vertical stretch of A was what?
Absolute value if it's
Greater than 1.
then it stretches.
So what do
Is it
you
gonna be the
think?
same as-
What do you think if this acts the way it should not? What is the stretch going to be?
The absolute value would be if it's more than 1, then you stretch. If it's less than 1, you shrink.
No, it's the opposite of what you think. If it's more than
I'm
one,
about to fail this.
if it's more than one, it's a shrink. So look, B's a horizontal stretch if it's less than 1, and you're going to tell me the reciprocal. Don't worry, I'll talk about that in a minute. Just get the notes down.
Reciprocal is the flip.
That's correct. If B is greater than 1, it is a shrink, and we use the reciprocal. And if B is negative,
Oh, it is the number 1.
it reflects the y-axis. So in the alphabet, what are the first two letters? A and B. In that order, correct? Now, towards the end, you have X, Y, and we're not dealing with Z. So A corresponds to the X axis. B corresponds to the Y. So that's how you can remember that. Now let me show you some examples of what this looks like. If I've got Y equals 3, let me do this. Make it absolute value. Okay, it's in the bracket, and it's in front of the X. Okay, yes, it's in the bracket. So it's your B.
Wait, give me a second. You're on horizontal shrink by 30.
Not by 3, but by flip it 1/3.
Oh my, I'm sorry.
No, you did good. Horizontal shrink by flip it because you can't shrink by 3. Everything shrinks in half or something shrinking by,
That was awesome.
by 1/4. So you shrunk by 1/3.
Always a fraction.
Yeah, is that always gonna be a fraction?
You're going to flip it now. Watch. That's why I said reciprocal.
Two.
Horizontal what?
Straight.
Stretch by 2.
This is gonna sound like I'm trying to be stupid,
So
but
when we do an absolute value a minute ago,
you can go ahead.
this is the opposite of the first one, why? Why you change it? The 3 is
Inside. The difference is this one's inside the grouping mechanism.
and so that means it's shrinking when it's in front.
Yeah. It's a vertical when it's in front, and it's a horizontal when it's inside. Adam?
This is gonna sound like I'm trying to be stupid. I promise I'm not. One of my math teachers told me this. Reciprocal. You turn into a different word. Helps you remember. It's the flip. Reciprocal.
That's fine.
Just thought I'd
Okay,
give that to you for free.
now let's talk about the C. The C is the shift right if it's negative, because remember it's opposite, and the shift left if it's positive. The B will be the one that gives you the harder
Yeah, I can tell.
time. So that would be one that would look like this.
Alright, that's gonna throw me off because why are you going right on a negative?
Because, all right, let me ask you something. If you have this parent function, the vertex is at 0, 0, right?
Yeah.
When I look at this and I solve for what x is, because I'm moving it over, it's going to change its sign, which means it's really at positive 2. It really moved right 2. Because when I take this and set it equal to 0 and solve for what my x value really is, I'm doing the opposite sign when I move it over and solve for x. That's why it's opposite. Just remember those 2 center letters do opposite of what you think, but that's why.
I'll try my best.
You just put set
You're
all
going to
into-
say right 2 on that one. That's all you have to tell me is right 2. So what if it was this? Is it basically grouped together? Yes. What?
Left 5?
That's correct.
I don't know on that, but can I go to the bathroom?
So it really doesn't matter how they're grouped. It's like
No, it does not matter how they're grouped as long, that's why I said grouping symbols of any type. Now see, if I had a +3 out here, it's not grouped. That's going to be a left 5, up 3.
so you still keep the left the up and down.
Separate.
See, A and B got their stuff together.
Okay. I'm going to do 1 through 16 with you on page 294. All we're going to do is describe. We're not going to regraph. Okay, everybody look at number 1. See that f of x? You see the +1. Now, is the +1 inside or outside the brackets? Outside. So that makes it an A or a D. Is it in front or is it behind?
It's a D.
It's a D. So if it's dealing with the outside, are we dealing with the vertical or the horizontal? Vertical. So all you have to do is tell me up 1. you're gonna have work to do, so if you need something to look back at, I would advise. Now let's look at number 2. Is that -1 inside or outside?
Alright, you're about to say
Outside.
left one.
No. Is it inside or is it outside brackets?
It's inside.
Number
Outside.
2. You're looking at the
Oh.
wrong one.
My bad. I went down. My bad.
Okay.
Alright,
So that's your D again. So it is
down one.
down 1. Now look at number 3. Do you see the difference between number 1 and number 3? Number 1 is outside brackets. It's your vertical. Number 3, the one is inside your bracket. It's dealing with the horizontal, and it acts opposite of what you think it should. So instead of being right 1, it is left 1. Any questions so far?
Right, on the left hand.
Okay. You don't pay attention to why.
If it's in the bracket.
If it's in the brackets, it acts opposite of what it should. You would think this would tell you right 1, but it's in the brackets, and the brackets make it act like it doesn't want to, like it should not. So instead of being right 1, the brackets make it act funny, which means it's going to be left 1.
And so if it's not inside the bracket, it's like x plus 1 outside the bracket, you just do it.
Exactly like it should. Inside the bracket changes it. Outside the bracket, it does exactly what it's supposed to. All right. Now look, this -1 is inside the brackets, so that means it doesn't act like it's supposed to. You would think left 1, but it's really right 1. Okay, let's look at number 5. We got a couple of things going on here. What 2 letters do we have with number 5?
We got C and D.
We have C and D. And C and D are both dealing with left, right, or up, down. Now, inside the bracket, it deals with the horizontal, left, right. Think about the bookshelf. Inside, left, right.
Right.
Outside, up, down. So,
Right 1.
right
down two.
1, down 2.
Then the other one's the left 1, up 2.
All right, hold on. Don't get ahead of me.
Because we have more. I think
Okay. Don't anybody say anything out loud. I want everybody to get an opportunity to look at it. You have a +1 and a +2. One's inside the bracket, one is outside the bracket. Inside the grouping changes it. Okay? It's in another dimension. It does opposite of what it should. Both of these are dealing, this is horizontal, this is vertical. So tell me what this one is. Adam?
Up 2 to the right.
No.
Oh, wait, no,
No.
move.
No.
Left 1,
Left
up 2.
1, up 2.
What? No. Okay. Wait.
In the bracket, it does the opposite. So
I
like,
know. That's what I'm saying. But
so like, you know,
absolute
plus-
value of 1 though is 1.
We don't deal with absolute value C or D. You didn't tell me, you didn't see me put absolute value C and D up there. It's only A and B.
Yeah, AB is absolute value. CD is not.
Okay.
C is inside the bracket.
Let's look at 7. Now, 7, the negative is on the inside, which means it's your B, okay? The negative is on the inside. So, if that affects your B, which letter does B correspond with, X or Y? Y, so it reflects the
X axis.
Y.
axis.
A and X are first. When you have A and B and X and Y, A and X correlate, B and Y correlate.
I put that on my thing. Wait. You said A and X, right?
A and X Let's think about A, B, the alphabet. What comes first? A,
Yeah, I
then
wrote-
B.
I wrote that down on my page.
What comes first? X, then Y.
Toast all year.
I think it's just
Now, look at the difference. Shh. Do you see the difference between 7 and 8 as to where the negative is placed?
Yeah, the negative's on the F instead of the X.
The negative is out front
You don't
of the
touch that
F. So, is that a negative A or a negative B?
one.
Negative A. And a negative A reflects the x-axis.
So if it's just a variable, if it's just an x, you just do reflection.
If it's a negative out front, a negative A, it reflects the X. There was no number here, so the height stayed the same.
So if there is a number there,
Then we would have like a vertical stretch by 2 or a vertical shrink by 1/3 or whatever it happened to be. But the negative, look, the only thing different from here to plain old f of x is that negative. So that means it's me, but flipped upside down. Everything else stays the same. I'm just flipped upside down. Okay? So it reflects the x. Now, let's look at this one. So we have two changes here. We have a negative out front and then a positive 3. Are either one of those inside the brackets? So it's your A, because that's first, and your D, because that's last. So a negative A tells you what? Reflects the X. Then what does the plus 3 tell you? Up 3. Now, where is the negative this time? Inside. So is that a negative A or a negative B?
I thought it was an A. I thought you said that the A was in front of the X.
No, the A is in front of the F of X here. See, the B came behind the F in that thing that you were asking me about. You didn't understand why I told you. See? A comes in front, B comes behind.
So where's the X at?
Well, it all depends. It could be right here. Okay. So, do you see the difference? But the main thing is that one's in grouping. This one is in grouping. So it's got to be your B. It's inside the parentheses. This one is not inside the parentheses. So it is your A, which tells you what? Reflects which axis? Okay, let's look at this one. The A is what's negative. Is anything in here inside the parentheses? Anything? No. So that's your A, that's your D. If A is negative, it reflects which axis? And then you do up 3. Now, is the negative inside the brackets or outside? Inside.
B.
So it reflects the Y. It is your B. It reflects the y-axis. And what does the plus 3 tell you? Up 3. Now, this one.
A.
It's your A. It's not in the parentheses. So it's a vertical shrink by 1/2.
So if it's B, that's when you flip it.
It's when it's B is when you flip it. Look at the. I'm gonna show you the difference here in a minute. Look at this 2. Is it inside or outside the brackets? it's an A, which means it acts exactly like it's supposed to. So it's a vertical stretch by 2. Now look at the difference. This 1/2, is it inside or outside brackets? Inside. So it deals with your horizontal. It's a horizontal stretch by 2.
Is B the only one you flip?
Yes. B's the only one you flip. Look at this one. Don't think of it as a 2, flip it. 1/2. So that would be a horizontal shrink. So it might help you to flip it first. What is this 1/2? So it'd be a horizontal stretch by 2 up 1. Now let's look at the last one. Okay. Is that the last one? Yeah. What is that negative? Is that your A, B, C, or D? So that tells you reflect the X. That 2, let's flip it. 1/2, so it's a horizontal shrink by 1/2 and down 1.
So the numbers on the outside don't never change like the
They can. Let me show you. So like if I gave you, I've got assignments, so y'all might better not want to. In this case, that's all A. So it reflects the X. The absolute value is 2, so it's a vertical stretch by 2. Then it would be up or down.
So if that doesn't change it to any of them.
Right. All right, here's your assignment. 17 through 32 on page 294. You will turn it in tomorrow.
When we get here,
Yep.
I'm taking a picture of it because we got 2 minutes.
Now,
Send it to you.
you have the book online. You'll
Okay.
go to Canvas, go to Pages, I believe, and click on the link, and it will download to your computer.